Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where we talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the Lazarus Project, Season 1, Episode 4. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So, the first part of this episode revolves around Shiv, and kind of getting to see, and not necessarily, well, the complications of what it's like being a mutant at such a young age, because Shiv made it pretty clear. George is coming into his mutation situation. Becoming a mutant is already a rare thing, but he became one at a later stage in life. Shiv has been one since he was young, and so at one point his mom came into his room and saw him as a kid walking and talking. It's like, whoa, this is too much. Like yesterday he wasn't doing all this, but he's not only standing, he's walking and talking. It's almost like the next day it happened. It's because time was constantly being rewound. It's like, she's like, right, it's almost like he made 6 months of development in like a day. It's like, yeah, probably because time rewound about 6 months. You're probably 6 months into that year before they went back to the checkpoint and everything. And obviously as he got older, he started having, well, not nightmares, but he's like, oh my god, there was an attack. It was where grandma and grandpa lived, but it's like, no, that was just a dream. But for him, it's like, no, it was real. And he started, figuring out, he's like, okay, so is it a superpower? Do I have it? Am I the one causing this? But he does probably eventually pick up on okay, it always goes back to July 1st. But he didn't know necessarily 100% what triggered, but he obviously could put context clues together, right, it happens every time there's a big world-ending type of almost massive scale attack. He pieces that together. So eventually he decided well, why don't I take advantage of it? So he remembered all these bets, I think some horse racing stuff, and then when time did reset, and he made sure, because obviously it's well, you can't write it down, so you gotta remember it. So every aspect of his day, he's verbally saying it over and over and over in his head until he can remember it easily. And so when time does eventually rewind, he makes a killing. He doesn't help out his uncle and his cousin like he wanted to. In actuality, he's spending on a lot of stuff. You saw him buy a Super Nintendo and stuff like that, and Mario and all these shoes and stuff. But then he's right, I only have a little bit of money left, so I'll every little bit counts. But by the time he wants to hand it over to his uncle and his cousin, their shop was on fire. They'd already had dealt with some racist skinheads, tagging up their store. Now it's oh, they went to this extreme. And another situation of I guess it's lucky, but unfortunately, once again, we've seen the complex duality of sometimes you luck out with these rewinds and sometimes you don't. In Shiv's case, he did, and he was able to he was happy to see that his cousin was still alive, so he was waiting for September something to roll around, and he's all right, I know this is when the attack is going to happen, so I'm going to stop the shop from being burned down. But the person who burned down the shop, the moment he entered the store and there's lights in there, I was why would they bother going inside the store? Why not just burn it from the outside? I'm it's his cousin. And I thought it was I was actually thinking it was going to be his uncle. I was insurance policy, but it's his cousin. His uncle and aunt wanted to keep the store going, but he's nah, but his cousin's nah, we do this, we'll get the money. Excuse me. The shop can't be saved. They don't make enough money for it to really matter. But the sad thing is Shiv, it's no, you idiot, you do this, you're surrounded by all this stuff, the fire isn't going to spread, it's going to spread way before you're able to get your mom and dad out of here. And sadly, his cousin gets arrested. We don't know what the rest of that story is what the aftermath of that is, but Shiv had already called the cops to kind of stop them ahead of time, so it's right, he didn't know it was his cousin at the time, so... But it's right, I am saving your life. I'd rather you be locked up than you have killed yourself. And it's so it seems Shiv never got another opportunity to redo that situation. That was kind of, I guess it's but we don't know what kind of strained relationship that put on Shiv with his uncle and his aunt and his cousin. Because it's oh, you're the one that reported him. You could have done something differently. But once again, he went into this thinking all right, I'm going to need the police show up to stop these skinheads from burning down my family's place. But it's no, it was your cousin who did it, trying to help out his family. It's right, maybe the argument could be right, if Shiv had helped out the way he originally had planned to. Granted, he probably by the time September rolled, no, because it's he got all the money before September, so I don't know. So I guess he didn't bother trying. I mean, who knows? Maybe he had actually completely forgotten, and because after everything that happened to the store, maybe he had actually forgotten, so he couldn't actually do the numbers again. Or it could be a thing of, well, every time goes back, things are going to change a little bit to some extent. We haven't really showcased that element of like everything in the world shifts. It kind of does, just because things play out differently. Because it's like, well, the second time through, like Sarah wasn't pregnant, but it's like, yeah, because George kind of scared her off and changed things. So it's probably sometime after they did some lovemaking in between that situation that eventually led to her getting pregnant. But they were kind of in this complicated space because he's like remembering this original timeline and she's not, and he feels like he's having deja vu and she's thinking he's going crazy. So that's probably the thing of like, right, you probably weren't pregnant at the time. So I mean, once again, well, I was about to say I can't ignore Dennis and Janet's situation from last episode. They had a boy in the original time, like before, but then like when everything rewound, they ended up having a girl. So it is a thing of like, yeah, so that is like the only situation where we've seen things kind of change in that capacity. At least with the George of it all, it makes sense because he kind of interfered in that, so that change was kind of on him. The Dennis and Janet of it all, that was kind of a different thing. Like I made the comparison of like, it's kind of like a TV show Flashpoint thing, specifically referencing the TV show Flash that did the Flashpoint storyline, its version of the Flashpoint storyline, which kind of had a similar development across the Arrowverse in a similar capacity with Diggle's storyline, but that's so that's why I was wondering, like, maybe the horse races didn't play out exactly the same this time around, and that's why he didn't get the money. But maybe he also thought, well, what's the point of getting the money if the shop's going to end up burned down anyway? So, but it's like, if he had gotten the money, maybe he could have given it to them and his cousin would have never done it in the first place. It is always that thing of, more information after the fact. And hindsight's 20/20, but, hindsight won't mean as much when you can't control when you go back. Plus you don't have and especially considering the conditions necessary to rewind time, the conditions that the Lazarus Project puts on itself to rewind, then it's like it limits like your control over that, obviously, because it's like, right, it has to be some like world-ending, big world-ending event type of thing for you to kind of, or at least the catalyst that could lead to a world-ending event that you have to rewind time, So like I said, Shiv might not even been thinking about like the money that time around, like I said. So he probably, like I said, might have thought it wasn't worth it considering the shop's going to get burned down anyway. But it's interesting, like if he had done it that time through, if he had done it the first time through, yeah, that is the interest, yeah, because if he had given the money to them like he initially wanted to the first time through, that wouldn't have led to his cousin burning down the place and him assuming skinheads did it, and when time rewound trying to save and change things, that whole sequence would have been undone regardless. But either way, we had Wells visiting him when he was younger, and was like, right, we've been keeping an eye on you for a while, so I know what's up. Kind of pretty much figured out he was a mutant. I wonder, when he was younger, his mom was calling around, so probably some of the aspects about Shiv's upbringing, about his development so quickly, probably like sends up some red flags for the Lazarus Project. So I do like that we are getting so much like background and insight to so many people. Obviously we didn't go super far back into Archie's circumstances, but we know a contributing factor in her circumstances played a massive role in Dennis and Janet's circumstances, and now we get Shiv's background. It's like, right, I'm assuming like person we will probably learn more about. I think I said Wells, I meant Wes, sorry. We're going to learn, yes, it's Wes, it's not Wells. I think I called her Wells before, but I don't know if I called her in previous episodes where I called her Wells or Wes. I think, either way, I feel like she's going to be the biggest one, enigma in the team to figure out her past, especially considering like, well, we don't know how long she's been a part of the Lazarus Project. And we also don't know how she got involved in the first place. Is she a natural... Well, I was about to say, is she a natural-born mutant? But it's like, no, it seems like George and Shiv are the only mutants. Everyone else had the stuff that they were injected with whatever it is that keeps them from... that makes them remember the alternate timelines, which we still haven't found out what is the process in which they do that. I wonder, do they, like, take genes, like are they able to synthesize stuff from a mutant's DNA and apply it to a normal person? Is that how that operates? Big question. I don't know if they're really going to dive into, but I mean, the way they've dived into a lot of intricate elements of this makes you feel like probably is something that they will dabble on at some point in time of kind of understanding how that process works. But either way, back to present day, they're trying to get information out of Rev about where Big Boy's located, but he's like, no, I don't know. Lost Glory, they're the ones who had it. You guys kind of screwed up my deal, so I never got the location of it. But showing all these pictures that are kind of like maps. I think they got it from Lost Glory's camp, but they can't register them and figure out what it is. But the whole thing doesn't sit well with George, specifically the torture angle of it, because he's thinking like, oh, Shiv, I can't believe you're doing this, because it's like, right, this is the organization I'm a part of. Why would you do that? But for Shiv, it's like, it's a necessary evil, especially because it's like, what we do is too important. It's like, the fact of the matter is, any other job, you can mess up, you can make a mistake. You can't make a mistake in this job, because he's like, I made a mistake, and we are still paying for it, and that's the Rev of it all. If he had killed the right person at that time, they wouldn't have had, like, Janet and Dennis wouldn't have lost their son, and then everything with their, like, it's a catalyst thing of Shiv probably blames himself for it all. Like, right, everything that happened the summer of 2018 with Archie's side of things, he's like, if it wasn't for me screwing the pooch on this situation, things wouldn't have, like, eventually turned into what they did with Archie and them constantly having to reset time over and over and over again, and the trauma and the complications that caused for Dennis and Janet, even to the point like when Shiv chased him down after he turned on the Lazarus project. It's like, once again, it's just like Shiv carries so much guilt over that, and that's why he's like, I pulled the trigger based on false intel. And someone back then didn't do their job enough to get the good intel. And because of that, like, we're in this situation. We have to deal with Dennis in the first place. So he's like, Dennis is a constant reminder of his greatest sin and his greatest failure in his mind. Well, not even sin, but failure. Because everything that Dennis has ever done in these past 5 years, Shiv holds himself responsible for it, because it's like, because of what I did, so much more death and destruction happened. Like, I am personally responsible for it. He carries that way. That's even more so reason why he doesn't, like, hang out with the gang. Like, he's constantly, like, beating himself up about it. That's why he kind of disconnects himself from the others with the karaoke and all that. And I don't think it's fair that Shiv is the one who has to take all that blame. I mean, it's the thing of Dennis and Janet needed someone to blame, understandably, you know, and he's the one that immediately came to them and like, hey, I messed up. It was false intel. And Dennis was like, get this done and fix it. But he couldn't, you know, no matter how hard he tried. And that's sad. And that's why he's extra motivated to do it here, because it's like, this is my mess to clean up. I'm the reason why Janet and Dennis ended up down the paths they did. And they don't really know about Janet, but they know about Dennis, because Janet's just kind of kept to herself. Because it does seem like, based on what we got that night, because Shiv ended up shooting Dennis, but took him to the hospital, but he broke the neck of the guard and disappeared. That night, Janet also disappeared as well. So that was probably, that night was probably the last time her and Dennis maybe talked to each other in those years. I mean, granted, Dennis knew exactly where she was, but it could easily be a thing of maybe they communicated every once in a while, or maybe it's just a, hey, I've kept an eye on you and our daughter. Like, I've always known when you were, to some extent. So that's the thing. George has got the story, but we don't know if he has the full scope of the story. He knows Shiv's part in all of this, but I don't really know. He hasn't really bothered to get Shiv's perspective on it. I mean, this episode and his conversation with George gave him insight on, right, that one mistake you can't take back. It's like, yeah, it's easy to also be like, oh, have such high principles when you haven't had to really worry about the end of the world, especially considering, like, right, you did die and some people died, and luckily that kind of got undone, but you're going to be the one pushing the button this time. So it's easy to kind of judge us of like, oh, like, morally what we're doing is wrong, which obviously torture is that thing of, for one, it's the information given isn't always reliable, because someone will say anything just to get you to stop torturing them. Two, it's that double, it's such a complicated thing of like, yeah, it's probably helped out in the past to stop some terrible things from happening, but it's still like, right, you're crossing this like line of just that inhumane element of just the human experience, and it's just, I don't condone it. I understand why they do it. I just don't condone it. Just kind of like George does, but it feels like he's almost being like, I don't understand why you do it either. No, he does, but it's just, I think it's understandable to have that complicated feeling about it. But I loved what Archie had said to him, like, ignore that part of your brain that's kind of getting at you about it, but don't lose it. Because it's like, right, you want to keep your humanity. You don't want to be like, you want to ignore that when it comes to this job, but you don't want to completely numb yourself to it, that you completely lose your humanity when it comes to this. So it's like, that's I think a delicate balance of don't let it control you, but also don't lose it in the process. Can we find out, like, she's saying, like, oh, Shiv wouldn't torture him. It's like, well, how do you know? Like, cameras down there. There are no cameras down there. You removed all of them. But it turns out Reb's black eye isn't even from Shiv. That's from Archie punching him, trying to get information out of him. So it's a little bit different for you, considering, like, right, you don't know everything that Dennis has done in those 5 years. They do. Plus, he was an ally and a friend who knows how long they worked together at the Lazarus Project. So it's like, right, we are a family, and this was our friend and our ally, and he not, I mean, once again, I don't know if George knows everything, because he got Janet's side of things, but even Janet doesn't know probably, because we as the audience got to see it, but we don't know how much of that Janet told us and how much is just the show giving us the perspective from Dennis, because she probably, like, all she has was like Dennis's phone call that night. She don't know that he ended up he was going to kill Wes, and he ended up killing, God, I'm blanking on her name now, but and because we haven't seen her around present day Lazarus Project, that means in that time frame they never had a reason to rewind time, so she stayed dead. Once again, it's like even though Wes probably wants her to come back, it's like, I can't let my selfishness get in the way, which obviously interesting juxtaposition with just, Dennis's circumstances and George's circumstances. So it's still a fresh enough wound with the Sarah of it all, understandably, but it's like, even to the point, her dad was calling about, like, oh yeah, preparations like to bury her body. It's like, oh, they still haven't buried her. It's still like pretty early days after her death, I'm sure. And so George is so focused, because he's like, I'm not going to worry, but I'll handle all that, yada yada. Because they were like, no, we'll handle it. Like, he doesn't care, because it's like, right, I'm going to bring her back regardless, so do whatever you want to. He ends up figuring out the map situation, because it ends up being like, it's kind of an elevation thing. Like, you have to raise the maps up almost like a 3D mapping, and you end up, I think you end up connecting them. I forgot how. I think George, like, put them all together, and like the raised locations all connect into a place in Romania. Was it Bucharest? And so he knows where to go, and did do the smart thing of, hey, let me not use my card and my money and stuff to buy the ticket. He never discontinued Sarah's card and stuff, so she still has money in her account, so he used that to buy the ticket. And hearing George be like, yeah, I'm staying in, it's like, right, you were kind of fine yesterday, now all of a sudden you're sick, and just it's like, if that's also the funny thing about time. If Archie had answered the phone, she probably might not have questioned it too much. She would have just been like, all right, sure, take whatever time you need. But Shiv is probably like, right, you questioning us about the thing. You also admitting to you going to talk to Red Bruv. It's like, what did you talk about? He's like, nothing. He didn't really want to talk to me much, considering he was beat up. And I was like, that stayed in the back of Shiv's mind. It's like, all right, check George's account. All right. Oh, nothing? Okay. And it's like, are you going to do it? And he stopped. He's like, what about his girlfriend Sarah's account? And that's what led him to it. And he decided to go on his own. I guess because, for one, he doesn't want to, they've already, he doesn't want to try and, well, I think there's twofold with why he went alone. One, that he wanted to make sure himself, even though it's right, he's buying something on Sarah's, why would he do that and, not move money from his own account? Especially, why would he want to touch anything related to Sarah right now, considering still such a fresh wound of losing her? But two, it's he wanted to bring George in by himself, just like he tried to do with Dennis, because he understands what this is all about. He understands the hurt they're going through, and so he wants to bring them back without turning this into a full blown. Because if the entire group gets involved, it might turn into an even bigger situation. So, luckily he had kind of like one of their tech guys like help him follow George in Bucharest, and turns into this whole great chase sequence, which I love. Because like first and foremost, George is just as trained as Shiv, plus he had the element of surprise. So took Shiv's gun, got off the train, ran into like a town/village. That whole chase sequence ended up like going out the window, but landing on the car, like his back. It's just like, oh, that wasn't a nice landing. I mean, kind of showcasing like, oh, it seemed like he was kind of badass for a moment, which he kind of is, like I said, but it wasn't the most graceful of landings. And so when the two finally like get their confrontation, I love like the cheekiness of, hey there, Mo, that was crazy back there landing, like, landing out the window. He's like, yeah, but it's like, you can turn back. Shiv is still trying to give him that opportunity like he did Dennis all those years ago. And it's like, which he already had to live with the mistake of, because I did that, Dennis got an opportunity to escape. And that's why we've been paying for that mistake ever since. But he was thinking like, George, you're not like Red Bruv. You're not going to do all the terrible things that he's done. You can go back. Like, it's not too late. Like, you've done some stuff, but you haven't like done anything reprehensible like Dennis has over these past years, because you're not him. I get it. You're grieving, and you're in this very unique position where it's like, not only are you grieving, it's possible to go back and save the person you love, but the thing is, deep down that you shouldn't do this. You can't do this. And George is like, it's not that deep down, like, So I don't know if you interpret that as, no, I don't have to like search deep to know like I shouldn't be doing this. It's surface level enough for me to know that, or whether it's just kind of like, no, like I don't have to search deep down, because of like, regardless of it, I want to save it. Like, I feel like there's ways you can kind of interpret that. And I was curious whether George was going to do it, and George pulls the trigger on Shiv, and it's like, don't worry, like, I'm going to bring her back, and I'm going to bring you back, and kills him. But even Shiv's like, if you do this, the first thing I'm going to do when you bring her back is I'm going to come after you. And it's like, that is a complicated thing of like, well, what are you going to do now that Shiv is onto you? Because the rest don't really know about it yet, but they will eventually. And what's going to happen when Shiv comes after you? Because how are you going to convince Sarah, like, hey, we should just leave, let's go? It's like, she's going to think you're crazy, and she's not want to go with you. So that's also the thing of like, if you were able to get her back and it just happened to be happenstance, then that's one thing, because you continue living your lives. But the moment you get her back, you're going to have to go on the run from the Lazarus Project. You're basically going to have to disappear like Janet and Dennis did. So kind of sadly, history kind of repeating itself in so many capacities. I thought the episode was going to break down to the point where, well, all George has to do is get close enough to the bomb so that it can like receive the signal from the detonator. So I thought that was going to be the thing of him trying to like rush, like, right, I need to go to this. I mean, he's doing everything he can to get away from Shiv, so he probably wasn't exactly in the same vicinity as where the like bomb is. So where Big Boy is. So it's probably a thing of, right, I just thought it was going to end up being that thing of like, right, he presses the detonator. It probably won't be until next episode we get that. George did get in contact with the guy that Shiv was working with. He's the only guy that knows what's what. So he gave the message to Red Bruv of like, oh yeah, big plans are afoot. And Red Bruv heard that and was kind of like, oh, what did you say? Got the guy closer and broke the guy's neck, because it's like, right. So had to kill the messenger because don't want to take the chance. This guy's the loose end. I mean, if all is done correctly, he'll be back too once Sarah is and Shiv. But it's like, yeah, that body count that you're responsible for is now starting to rack up a little bit more, George. So that's definitely going to be interesting to see. Is it all really going to just go down next episode, or will it be the season finale? Because there's still 4 more episodes in this season. So when they decide to get George closer to the bomb, to pull, like, I could see that being like the end of the next episode, or maybe like the end of next episode is Sarah. Like, I feel like you gotta like it could easily be a season finale, but I feel like they're probably going to get to that a little sooner, and like him living with the whole like trying to be on the run with Sarah maybe, because the moment he undoes all of that, Dennis is also going to end up being free of the Lazarus project, so he's going to be able to continue doing what he's doing. He's just going to probably have to pick up a new, because by then like Big Boy will have been put back where it was, and he'll be free, so he'll have the opportunity to get to it before anyone else does, so, and kind of continue doing what he's doing. So once again, how's that going to impact your life, considering like, hey, you activate Big Boy, you reset everything, he's going to get to Big Boy first, and your life is still going to constantly get reset, but maybe he's thinking like, at the very least, Sarah will still be alive, so it's okay. But once again, now that future knowledge of, alternate timeline knowledge of, once that's done, what are you going to do when things change? Because you won't be able to be prepared for everything, because if you do things completely different, who knows what that timeline's going to look like? It still might be a kind of that almost fate and destiny gets what it's owed in the end anyway, because it's like, hey, Sarah died, and maybe she still ends up dying in this new timeline in just some way you didn't foresee. It's just because you had the knowledge of this a previous timeline of how she died, but that's not applicable in a timeline where you've changed it. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see how this paces out over the next couple episodes and where everything ends up taking us going forward in the next episode. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and good